Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this module, we will discuss Cartagena and Nagoya Protocol. The purpose of this module is to explain the scope, application and obligations under Cartagena Protocol and to examine the scope and responsibilities of state as well as other stakeholders under Nagoya Protocol. The module is aimed to elaborate the actions taken by India in implementing these protocols and also focused to elaborate what are the benefits of these protocols. For the purpose of convenience, we have divided this module into various parts. In first part, we will be dealing with Cartagena Protocol and further divided into objectives, its application and what do we mean by advanced informed consent. We will also be discussing living modified organisms for direct use as food or feed and other distinct features of Cartagena protocols, followed by Indian position in context of compliance of Cartagena Protocol. In second part of this module, we will discuss Nagoya Protocol, and in Nagoya Protocol, the first subpart shall aim at explaining the objectives, and you will also be sensitized about the obligations of the member states under this protocol. The purpose of this protocol is threefold. First is access, second is benefit sharing and compliance in context of benefit sharing, conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and its other resources, as well as what is the status of India in context of implementation of Nagoya Protocol. So friends, let's begin with Cartagena Protocol. Cartagena Protocol is mainly focused on the biosafety, and its object is to ensure the biosafety and to make it guaranteed that the biosafety resources are safe and protected while being transferred in the form of living modified organism in their transboundary movements having adverse impact or probability to cause adverse impact on health and environment. Therefore, the Cartagena Protocol is meant to provide a procedure to handle the living modified organisms in a safe way while being transported and its application where it is applied. So, friends, we will have to understand that the protocol is applicable on transboundary movement, transit handling and when the use of living modified organisms is in vogue. And please mind that the Cartagena Protocol is not applicable to pharmaceutical for human beings. The most important or distinct feature of Cartagena Protocol is advance informed agreement, because the countries, the member states who are transacting with each other, they are under an obligation to enter into the terms and conditions of this advanced informed agreement, but it must be kept into account. It may be considered that advanced informed agreement, in short AIA, is not applicable to LMOs in transit, LMOs for contained use, LMOs intended for direct use as food or feed for processing. All of these LMOs under international environmental law, the fundamental principle of precautionary principle is also relevant in this scenario. We are living in the age of globalization. The countries are dependent on each other. So, these living modified organisms may be exchanged by them as food or feed items, but at the same time, it is must to contain the adverse impact of these living modified organisms on human health as well as environment. So, the purpose of Cartagena Protocol is to ensure that all the precautions are taken and human and the adverse impact on human health as well as environment containing the biodiversity is minimized. So, the purpose of Cartagena Protocol is to ensure the resilience and adaptive potential of our natural resources is judiciously utilized and the adverse effects are minimized. So far as advanced informed agreement is concerned, it has a very comprehensive procedure under Cartagena Protocol. And in its this comprehensive procedure, there are various steps. The parties are expected to notify, they are under some legal obligations that can be ratified and put in the course of implementation through bilateral or multilateral agreements. So, the parties are under an obligation to notify in writing. The party which is exporting, that has to notify to the party who is importing the name, address and contact details of the exporter as well as importer. And in addition to it, the notification should also contain the name and identity of the living modified organism, and it should also be specifically mentioned what is the expected date or the duration when these living modified organisms should be put in the course of transboundary movement, and the taxonomic status in terms of their common name, the point of collection, the acquisition and the characteristics of recipient organism or parental organism related to biosafety, centers of origin and centers of genetic diversity. All these must be specifically stated in that notification. Apart from this, the protocol also implies that the centers of genetic diversity, if these are known, particularly in context of the recipient organism and or the parental organism, their taxonomic status, their common name, the point of collection or acquisition and characteristics of the donor organism need to be detailed in that notification. The protocol also obliges the member states that they must describe the nucleic acid or the modification being introduced through this transfer or handling or use of living modified organism. The technique which is being used for exploiting those living modified organisms or products, as well as what is the quantity, what shall be the volume of that LMO that will be transferred. So, all these details have to be furnished in that agreement. Besides, to curb the menace or adverse impact on the human health, environment and other biodiversity and natural resources, a risk assessment has also to be carried out, and the results of this risk assessment in the form of a report should be attached in the form of Annexure 3. Besides, how and what kind of methods shall be used by the exporter for the safe handling, storage, transport and use, including what shall be the kind of packaging, labeling, documentation in common language, disposal and contingency procedure etc. shall be notified by the exporter state to the importer state. It also carries out an obligation on both the states to ensure that living modified organisms within the state of export and what shall be the result and purpose of this notification by the exporter to other states regarding the LMOs to be transferred. So, friends, here we will have to appreciate that when this notification is made or issued by the exporter state, it has to be acknowledged by party of import. The state to whom the LMOs are being imported, and this acknowledgement is not open-ended. It has to be maintained, it has to be acknowledged within the stipulated time of 90 days. And if it is, please mind that here the concept of deemed consent as applicable in other domestic laws in few of the jurisdiction around the world, that concept of deemed consent is not applicable in context of Cartagena Protocol. Suppose if the state of import does not notify its acknowledgement within 90 days, it does not mean that it has given its consent. So, if not in 90 days, then party of import is expected under this protocol that it can give its consent within 270 days based on certain conditions, or it may give some conditional kind of approval, and if the prohibition of additional information is requested, then the period can be extended up to 270 days. And in these 270 days, if the importer party is agreed, that acknowledgement has to be communicated to the exporter as well as biosafety clearing house, and this acknowledgement and consent should be comprehensive in context of all the regions to be recorded. Besides, the importer parties are also having the liberties, because the states under the international law, they all are having the sovereign right to use their natural resources. So, in case at later stage or subsequently after the importing state has given its consent and it finds that living modified organisms, their transit, their arrival, their handling or their use in the importing country adversely affects, then the importing country can withdraw or revise the terms of conditions of consent. So, those conditions can be revised, the consent can be revised. And the next point where Cartagena Protocol is applicable, it is applicable in context of living modified organism. Those are used for as food or feed and processing simplified procedure. So, here the party which allows the domestic use of living modified organism, it has to intimate to the biosafety clearing houses of the countries also. So, the name and the contact details of the applicant for a decision for domestic use, the name and contact details of the authority which is responsible under the agreement, and what is the decision. So, the decision shall be comprehensive and reasoned. Then it shall also include name and identity and taxonomic status of the LMO, coupled with what is the gene composition and gene modification, and what is the technique that would be put in the course of use, and the resulting characteristics of the living modified organisms. The consent and the acknowledgement should also include the unique identification of the LMO, the taxonomic status as I had already discussed, and the common name which is in vogue in both the countries, exporting country as well as importing country, and what shall be the point of collection and acquisition, characteristics of recipient organism, means all those details which we had discussed that exporting country has to notify in agreement, those details should also be in the consent, and a description of the habitats where the organism may persist or proliferate, taxonomic status, common name, point of collection or acquisition, and the characteristics of the donor organism or organisms related to biosafety. So, here the parties are also empowered to refuse the consent that is based on their scientific knowledge, or if it is deemed that grant of such a consent may adversely affect their environment, the human health or the natural resources within the territory of importing country. So, friends, in context of its application at the level, the Cartagena Protocol is applicable and can be applied through the signing of bilateral treaties, regional treaties and multilateral treaties. And the focus of this protocol shall be to regulate the transboundary movement of LMOs and ensure that if any living modified organism endangers the human health, then the emergency measures can be taken in view of handling, transportation, packaging and identification of LMOs, and the information must be communicated to the biosafety clearinghouse. And in this regard, the Cartagena Protocol also obliges, puts certain obligation on the member states who have ratified it, that to ensure that the proper capacity building measures are taken to ensure the biosafety. So far as Indian position is concerned, India has signed this protocol in 2001 on 21st January and it ratified on 11th September 2003. Please mind that Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change has been empowered as a nodal agency, and it frames the rule for the manufacturing, use, import, export and storage of hazardous microorganisms, genetic engineered organisms or cells, and especially 1986 Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee, Institutional Biosafety Committee, Genetic Engineering Approval Committee and Review Committee on Genetic Manipulation, State Biotechnology Coordination Committee and district level committees are forming the other tiers of the implementing mechanism to ensure the biosafety in context of living modified organisms. And now we shall proceed towards Nagoya Protocol. Friends, Nagoya Protocol is very much important so far as the biodiversity is concerned. Biodiversity has to be preserved not only for the benefit of the present generation as well as for the future generations as well. Therefore, the objectives of the Nagoya Protocol are considered as very holy and fair. The purpose of the Nagoya Protocol is first to conserve, second to ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources, and third to ensure their sustainable use through the use of technology. If the developing world and the third world is not having or equipped with appropriate technology, then the developed countries are under an obligation to transfer their technology and ensure cooperation for ensuring conservation of biodiversity and sustainable use of biodiversity under the theory of social engineering and interdependence of the countries on each other. Nagoya Protocol aims to ensure fair and equitable access not only to biodiversity resources, but also traditional knowledge that is associated with genetic resources for the use and welfare of humanity. So friends, the Nagoya Protocol imposes a few obligations on the member countries, the MNCs and other stakeholders, in other words the users who access the bioresources of other nations. So if we look at Nagoya Protocol as a whole, the purpose is to ensure that the biodiversity and bioresources are accessed in the legal way, and the mechanism which ensures and provides and facilitates the access to the bioresources, that should be precise, brief, clear and transparent, and it should ensure the equitable access. And for this purpose, the Nagoya Protocol is also aimed at access to benefit sharing, and access to benefit sharing mechanism has been the fundamental principle underlying the spirit of Nagoya Protocol. So Nagoya Protocol, to sum up the introductory part of Nagoya Protocol, I hope it makes clear to all the students that its purpose is threefold: to conserve the biodiversity and bioresources, second, to ensure sustainable use and equitable use, and third, access to benefit sharing. Now we will head towards next part of our discussion, that where Nagoya Protocol is applicable. In Nagoya Protocol, the main distinct feature, which is access to benefit sharing, that has to be applied through mutually agreed terms between the parties. The parties, as per the provisions of Nagoya Protocol, may be the states and the institutions from across the states, as well as for the purpose of their trade, business and research. So the institutions from the countries who are the parties to that mutually agreement, they can enter into contract. And other distinct feature of Nagoya Protocol is PIC. PIC, the full form of PIC is prior informed consent, and prior informed consent has been incorporated in Nagoya Protocol to ensure that the participation of stakeholders, and here the stakeholders are indigenous and local communities. Their participation is also ensured through local biodiversity management committees. And since the local communities, the indigenous communities are utilizing those resources with the help of their traditional knowledge, and that traditional knowledge is used for various purposes. Therefore, the principle of prior and informed consent ensures the involvement of the stakeholders, and it encourages and promotes the research in biodiversity, particularly in developing countries, so as to ensure that the bioresources, biodiversity, natural resources are conserved and best possible judicious use is put in practice. Therefore, to ensure access to genetic resources through very simple procedure, particularly in case of non-commercial research, that research which can be used for the welfare of humanity, for the welfare of present as well as future generations by preserving the natural resources. and even through research, the best possible and judicious use of natural resources has been made possible with the contribution of researchers and scientists. Therefore, Nagoya Protocol is focused to ensure that the arrangements for dealing with immediate or imminent emergencies which threaten any species of plants or living organisms is curbed. Therefore, Nagoya Protocol is very significant step to conserve the biodiversity and genetic resources for providing appropriate food and agriculture. And major feature of Nagoya Protocol is to incorporate benefit sharing obligations which was not covered in Cartagena. So, in benefit sharing obligations, it is not necessary that the applicant who is accessing the natural resources, he has to share only the monetary benefits. He can also contribute by sharing the non-monetary benefits as advancement of research and technology to promote the traditional knowledge being put in the course of application by indigenous community, to ensure that those bioresources which are being accessed by the applicant, those are not extinguished and those are preserved, their tissues, their specimens are preserved. Therefore, the sharing of benefits under Nagoya Protocol is not only monetary, it also covers non-monetary sharing of benefits. And the parties who can enter into agreement, they have to mutually agree, and there should be consensus ad idem, the consensus on the same points. So, Nagoya Protocol puts certain obligations under international biodiversity law to ensure that the states who are the members and who have ratified, they take appropriate measures. They frame the legislations, they devise their administrative mechanism so that the bioresources and biodiversity is accessed in a fair and equitable way. So, in this regard, so far as those obligations should not come in conflict with the local laws and those laws which have been enacted and are being applied to protect the interest of indigenous communities. Therefore, while taking steps at the domestic level, a state or a national government or government of a member nation has to ensure that the conflict in the interest of indigenous community as well as to protect the bioresources, and while granting the access, that conflict has to be minimized. The friction has to be minimized. There must be reconciliation of interest. So, friction has to be minimized and conservation, sustainable use of these resources has to be maximized. Therefore, Nagoya Protocol also incorporates the mechanism of prior informed consent and mutual agreed terms. Those will be taken into account at the time of signing the agreements. While signing the agreements, the parties can impose and incorporate their terms and conditions, that what would be the remedy in case of violation of access to benefit sharing requirements. They can also incorporate the provision of remedy and mechanism to go for the arbitration, the compensation, the damages, and what shall be the procedure for implementation and enforcement of foreign judgments and arbitral awards. And if any party misses or violates the terms and conditions of mutually agreed agreement, then what shall be the remedies available to both the parties? Besides, the protocol also imposes a condition on both the parties that how to develop the mechanism for monitoring and what are the methods to ensure transparency so far as utilization of genetic resources, including establishment and designation of checkpoints from where the information relating to prior informed consent and other things can be collected or received. So, the detailed guidelines have been given under various articles of Nagoya Protocol. And here, now moving ahead, we can look at Article 17 and to be read with Article 14. It imposes an obligation on the member states that they should establish an ABS clearing house. That ABS clearing house means access to benefit sharing clearing house, and that should work as a national coordination agency. That national coordination agency will grant the consent, will grant the permits to the parties and to the applicants. So, that agency shall provide its comprehensive mechanism, procedure, application form and the code of conduct, guidelines, best practices and standard operating procedure to accord the consent. So, friends, now we will be heading towards the compliance at the national level. So far as Indian status in context of Nagoya Protocol is concerned, India has already enacted its Biodiversity Act in pursuance of its commitment that it wished to honor regarding Convention on Biological Diversity. So, the Biodiversity Act was enacted in the year of 2000, and then in pursuance of Biodiversity Act, it has also framed the guidelines on access to biological resources, associated knowledge and benefit sharing regulations 2014. Under section 3 and 4 of Biodiversity Act, it states that to whom the permission can be accorded. Apart from this, the Biodiversity Act is so comprehensive that it also, in addition to the establishment of National Biodiversity Authority, State Biodiversity Board and Biodiversity Management Committees, a 3-tier mechanism has been provided under Biodiversity Act 2000. And it also obliges the National Biodiversity Authority to go and encourage, sensitize for the stakeholders and organize more capacity building programs so that the conservation, the sustainable and judicious use of bioresources, biodiversity can be ensured. And the third feature of Biodiversity Act is to ensure the access to benefit sharing. So, friends, in this way, the Biodiversity Act is so comprehensive that it has been framed in consonance with the obligations framed under the Nagoya Protocol, and both are in synchronization with each other. I hope this would serve the purpose. It must explain you what is Nagoya Protocol and how far Indian Biodiversity Act caters to the obligations of the member states in context of Nagoya Protocol. Thank you.